Winter 1947, the year the trains started running on time again. The war had ended almost 2 years earlier, but in Germany, time still limped. Cities looked like missing teeth. People moved through them with the quiet of survivors who had learned to count blessings by the spoonful. In a small town outside Hamburg, a man named Ernst Keller buttoned his coat, adjusted the brim of his worn felt hat, and held a letter that had crossed an ocean. Dear Mr. Keller, if you ever find yourself in Texas again, the doors of Camp Barclay's hospital will still be open, even if the patients have long gone home. Monsieur Alden, RN. He read the single paragraph twice, then folded it with the same care a soldier gives to maps. For 2 years he had tried to live as though his life had restarted in the ruins, fixing roofs, mending clocks, helping rebuild the school. But each night, when he washed the dust from his hands, he still saw the white corridor of that Texas ward, smelled antiseptic and sun-baked wood, heard the American nurse saying, "Hold still, soldier. This one's going to hurt before it heals." Now, a train ticket to Bremen trembled between his fingers. The U.S. occupation authorities were allowing limited civilian travel. For purposes of reconstruction, trade, and approved private correspondence. He would make his purpose fit. The Atlantic crossing felt endless, a gray drumroll of waves. On the deck of the Liberty ship, Adelina Morse, Ernst stood among engineers, widows, and a choir of displaced souls headed west. He kept the letter inside a tobacco tin against his chest. When the Texas sun finally cracked the horizon outside Galveston weeks later, he squinted into it like a man looking straight at his own memory. The port smelled of salt, diesel, and oranges, the last he hadn't tasted since 1944. He took a bus north through fields that unspooled like film. Cotton, mesquite, barns painted red against an impossible blue sky. The driver, a man in his 40s with a cigarette glued to his lip, asked, "You visiting family?" Ernst hesitated. "Something like that." "Where to?" "Abilene," the driver whistled softly. "Army country. You'll like the folks there. They remember things." 40 miles west of town, the remains of Camp Barclay still stood. Half-dismantled barracks, flagpoles stripped of their flags, and one low stone building with faded letters that once read Post-Hospital Ward C. Ernst stepped down from the truck that had given him a ride the last few miles. The air smelled of cedar and soaproot. Somewhere, a windmill creaked. He walked through the open gate. The place felt smaller than he remembered, as if peace had shrunk it. The wards were empty now, windows open to the prairie. He found the door with the squeak that used to announce her entrance. Inside, dust motes drifted like tiny parachutes in the light. On the wall hung a clipboard, yellowed and blank. On the floor, a single bedsheet, folded into a square no larger than a book. He bent to pick it up. Embroidered in one corner, faint but legible, were 2 initials. M.A. He smiled. "Still neat as ever," a voice from behind. "I keep telling them not to tear this wing down until I say so." He turned. In the doorway stood Dr. Maggie Alden. Hair shorter now, streaked with the first signs of silver. Uniform replaced by a simple white dress and a stethoscope hanging like a keepsake. For a second they both froze, caught between time zones. "Miss Alden," he said, standing straighter than he had in years. "Dr. Alden," she corrected with a half-laugh. "But I'll answer to either." He took off his hat. "I came to thank you." "You already did," she said. "You lived." They walked outside, the light gold on the grass. In 1944, she had patched him together after a compound fracture, a logging accident inside the camp where POWs cut timber for the Army's post-construction. He'd been delirious for 3 days. She'd stayed beside him through the fever, feeding him broth, speaking slow English until he learned enough to whisper back. When repatriation orders came in 1946, he tried to leave her a note, but the transport left at dawn. Now the words finally found air. "I used to think kindness was just another tactic," he said. "That if you were kind to the enemy, maybe he'd talk more. But you did it even when no one watched." Maggie looked toward the horizon, where the wind bent the grass. "I wasn't kind because you were the enemy," she said. "I was kind because you were hurt. That's supposed to be the easy part." He nodded. "And the hard part? Letting the world believe it was enough." They fell silent. A train horn moaned in the distance. The evening freight bound for Fort Worth. The sound rolled over the empty camp like a benediction. That night, Maggie insisted he stay in town. She arranged a room above the pharmacy, the same one she had rented to a traveling dentist once. "Breakfast at 7, she said. "I make terrible coffee but good biscuits." The room was simple. Iron bed, wash basin, and a window overlooking Main Street where neon from the diner flickered, eat, eat, eat. Ernst unpacked the small suitcase. One shirt, a pair of socks, and the tin with her letter. He placed it on the nightstand and opened the window. The wind carried smells of bacon grease and magnolia. Below, a boy on a bicycle shouted something about the high school game, and for the first time in years, the noise of peace sounded normal. He lay awake remembering the ward, the radio she'd tuned to swing music, the jar of candy she'd kept for cooperative patients, the way she'd said, "Mr. Keller, your bones are stronger than your regrets." He had laughed then, not understanding the word regrets. Now he did. The next morning the town noticed him. Not in a hostile way, more like the way people notice the first cool day after a long heat wave. At the diner, a waitress asked, "You from around here, mister?" He smiled. "Once, a long time ago." She poured coffee. "You talk like the professor who runs the college. Where are you headed?" He glanced toward the hospital road. "Back to say thank you." When he returned to the old camp that afternoon, Maggie was stacking medical ledgers into crates. "They're closing this place," she said. "Army's turning it into a veterans rehabilitation center. Thought I'd clear out the ghosts first." Ernst picked up one of the crates. "May I help?" She nodded, grateful. For an hour they worked in quiet rhythm. Dust, paper, the scrape of shoes on floorboards. Through an open window came the faint sound of a child's laughter from somewhere down the road. "Kids," she said, smiling. "A rancher's family moved onto the east field. I like hearing them. Reminds me life went on." He studied her face. "Did you lose someone?" he asked softly. "Everyone lost someone," she replied. Then after a pause, "My fiancé, an army doctor. Italy. I'm sorry." "I was too," she said, "until I realized sorry isn't a finish line. It's a bridge." When the sun lowered, Maggie locked the doors of Ward C for the last time. She turned the key twice, then handed it to him. "Souvenir," she said. "You helped keep this place honest." He looked at the key, brass worn smooth by years of hands. "I have nothing to give you," he said. "Only words. Then make them good ones." He thought a moment. "You taught me that mercy is stronger than orders." She blinked quickly, looked away and said, "That'll do." At dusk they drove toward the edge of Abilene, to the small cemetery where the hospital staff had buried two unnamed POWs who never made it home. The wooden crosses had weathered gray. Ernst knelt, brushed dust from one. "No names," he murmured, "but someone's sons." Maggie set a small bouquet between the markers. "I come every year," she said. "The town doesn't like to talk about this part, but I can't pretend they just disappeared." He looked at her and said quietly, "Maybe remembering is also mercy." When the last light faded, they walked back to the truck. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "The consulate says there's work for translators in Washington, but part of me, I think it belongs here." "Texas isn't an easy home," she said. "But it's a forgiving one," he smiled. "So was its nurse." She blushed, unexpected even to herself, and changed the subject. "Tomorrow's Sunday. You should see the town's church. They rebuilt the steeple last year, with wood cut by POWs. Seems right you should see it." "I will." They shook hands, a brief clasp that felt like sealing a treaty no nation had written. Then she drove off in her dusty Ford. The taillights blinked twice before the road swallowed them. Ernst stood alone under the Texas sky, the key to Ward C warm in his palm. The wind carried the smell of mesquite and far-off rain. He closed his eyes, listening. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a nurse was humming. The same tune she used to hum while changing bandages. And the prairie kept the rhythm. He whispered the English word he had learned years ago, the one she had written on the blackboard when the war was still young and the world wasn't. Friend. The church bell in Abilene rang like a heart that refused to retire. Sunday morning, 1947. Texas sunlight pouring through the oaks, catching the white dresses and pressed suits of a town trying to look forward. Ernst Keller sat in the last pew, hat in hand. The service had already begun, but the usher had nodded him in anyway. Around him, families filled the pews in small clusters, farmers, merchants, veterans with polished pins on lapels. He could feel eyes on him. Not hostile, just curious. Recognition was a slow echo in small towns. The pastor's voice rolled steady from the pulpit. "Forgiveness," he said, "is not a single act. It's a long road walked barefoot." Ernst felt the words settle somewhere behind his ribs. When the hymn began, he didn't know the melody, but the woman next to him, hair the color of wheat, offered him her hymnal, turning it halfway so they could both see. He hesitated, then sang in quiet German syllables beneath the English ones. The harmony was accidental and beautiful. After the service, People gathered under the oak trees, sipping lemonade, talking about the rain that hadn't come yet. Maggie Alden found him by the fence, where the boards had begun to bleach white. "Didn't think you'd take me up on the church invitation," she said, half grinning. "I told you I would," he answered. "Besides, I wanted to see what forgiveness looks like here." And he looked at the children chasing each other across the grass, the veterans shaking hands with boys too young to have fought. "It looks possible." That afternoon, Maggie drove him to the edge of town. "Figured you might want to see this," she said. They parked beside a low building with a tin roof. A hand-painted sign read, "Harper Clinic, Community Health, founded 1946. This was built from the leftover lumber from Camp Barkley," she said. "We're turning it into a civilian hospital. The Army helped with supplies, but we're short on people who can read the German labels on half the medical crates. You see where this is going?" He blinked. "You want my help? I want you to translate. Temporarily." He smiled faintly. "So, the enemy becomes the librarian," she shrugged. "Better than the patient." Inside, the clinic smelled of varnish and fresh plaster. On the central desk, open boxes overflowed with glass bottles and field manuals stamped U.S. Army Medical Corps. He picked one up, running his fingers across the label. "Salicylic acid, Herkunft, Deutschland." "I packed these once," he said softly, "for soldiers who'd never lived to use them." "Now they'll heal farmers," Maggie said. "Seems fair." He looked at her. "You built this?" "Not alone. The town council needed something to do with the leftover supplies. They wanted to burn the rest. I said I'd rather use them. Some people didn't like the idea of a German helping, but you convinced them," she grinned. "They owe me too many stitches to argue." For the next week, Ernst worked at the clinic. His handwriting, precise, architectural, filled labels and translated manuals. He taught the staff how to pronounce the compounds correctly. In the evenings, he walked the dusty streets of Abilene, nodding politely at shopkeepers who didn't yet know what to make of him. Children were the first to stop being afraid. One day, a boy of about 8 watched him mend a broken chair outside the clinic. "You the German?" the boy asked bluntly. "I used to be," Ernst said. "What are you now?" He thought for a second. "A carpenter of second chances." The boy frowned at the strange answer, then laughed anyway, the sound clear as wind chimes. But not everyone laughed. On Wednesday, a group of men from the American Legion stopped by the clinic. The leader, a tall man with a missing thumb, said flatly, "We don't mean no disrespect, Dr. Alden, but folks are asking why a German soldier's working in a place where our boys come for care." Maggie folded her arms. "Because he's qualified, and because most of those supplies are written in German. Unless you'd like me to guess what's in every bottle." The man hesitated. "It's just hard to stomach. Some of us were in Bastogne." Ernst spoke quietly. "So was I, different side. We both froze the same." The men looked at him then. Really looked. The silence stretched until the leader finally said, "Long as he's translating and not treating." "Long as he's helping," Maggie corrected. They left without another word. That night, Ernst stayed late labeling the last of the medical boxes. Maggie returned from a home visit, hair windblown, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She poured 2 cups of stale coffee and set one beside him. "You handled that better than I did," she said. "I'm used to suspicion. It's honest, easier than pity. You ever regret coming back?" He shook his head. "Regrets for people who still think they can change the past. I just wanted to thank the one person who made the past survivable." She looked at him a long time. "Do you ever think about staying?" He hesitated. "You mean here? In Texas?" She nodded. "Every time the wind smells like cedar," he said. She smiled but didn't answer. The quiet between them was softer than words. A few days later, a telegram arrived at the clinic, addressed to Mr. Ernst Keller, care of Dr. M. Alden. He opened it under the lamp's yellow glow. Translation post available. Washington, D.C., Department of War Documentation. Report within 10 days if interested. He folded the paper. "Looks like the government has found a use for me after all." Maggie's face didn't change. "That's good news." "Yes," he said slowly. "Good news." But his tone said otherwise. That evening they drove to the hill overlooking the old camp. The horizon was painted in orange dust and fading light. "Funny," Maggie said. "This place was built to hold men apart. Now it's just fields again." Ernst glanced at the abandoned watchtower. "Freedom and fences have the same wood. Only purpose changes them." She nodded, eyes distant. "If you leave for Washington, you'll be near the people writing the history of this war. Then I'll make sure they spell mercy." "Right," he said quietly. They stood there until the stars began to burn through the purple sky. When they turned back toward the truck, he stopped. "Dr. Alden, Maggie, may I ask something?" "Anything." When I was here before, you wrote something on the chalkboard the day I was discharged. I never understood it fully. You said, "The war is over when one person refuses to hate." Did you believe that? I still do, she said. You're the proof. He smiled, small and tired. Then maybe I'll take that to Washington with me. She didn't stop him. But when she climbed into the driver's seat, her hands trembled on the steering wheel. That night, he packed. The key to Ward C lay on the table beside his ticket stub. He stared at it for a long time before picking it up and wrapping it in a clean handkerchief. Outside, the wind stirred the pecan trees. Somewhere in the distance, the train whistle sounded. The same line that had brought him here, now ready to take him away. He thought of Maggie's voice saying, "The war is over when one person refuses to hate." He thought of the men at the Legion Hall, the boy with the broken chair, the laughter under the church oaks. He thought of a nurse humming to herself in a quiet ward, and wondered if peace, like music, was something you could only hear when you stopped marching. He blew out the lamp and whispered the words she had taught him when the world was still burning. Home. Summer, 1947. The trains that once carried soldiers now carried letters, news, and the quiet ache of unfinished stories. For Dr. Maggie Alden, the days fell into a rhythm again. Patients, prescriptions, paperwork. But some mornings, when she opened the clinic's logbook, she caught herself glancing toward the corner of the desk where Ernst Keller used to sit, labeling bottles with that neat, deliberate hand he'd left for Washington 3 months ago. His last note had been polite, almost formal. Dear Maggie, thank you for showing me what peace can sound like. If the world ever needs translation again, I hope it speaks your language. She kept that line folded in her coat pocket. It wasn't a love letter, not exactly, but it was the kind of line a heart reads twice. By August, the clinic was thriving. The veterans' wives brought casseroles for the staff. The town council stopped questioning who'd built the place. But one Thursday morning, a new envelope arrived. Blue-tinted airmail, foreign stamps. The handwriting was unfamiliar. She tore it open, and the first word stopped her breath. Frau Dr. Alden. If this finds you, please tell Mr. Keller that his mother is very ill. She asks for him every day. Pastor Heinrich Blum, Bremen. The letter was dated 6 weeks earlier. Maggie set it down. Outside, cicadas buzzed, loud and careless. Inside, the world had gone very still. That night, she wrote a telegram to Washington. Urgent. Seeking contact with Mr. Ernst Keller. War Doc's office. Family emergency. Please, reply. The response came the next day. Keller resigned June 15th. No forward address. She stared at the paper, heart sinking. She poured herself coffee that went cold untouched. Then she made a decision. If he couldn't be found by telegram, she'd find him by memory. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from Galveston. A single sentence scrawled in hurried penmanship. Leaving tomorrow for Bremen aboard the SS Meridian. Keller. She exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. She wanted to be glad. His mother needed him. But beneath the relief sat something heavier. The quiet realization that some people you help heal will always have to leave to finish the cure. 2 months passed. Autumn came early that year, bringing rain that soaked the fields and turned the dust roads to rust-colored mud. The war at last seemed far away. The camp's remaining buildings were being torn down for lumber. Only the small stone hospital, her hospital, still stood. Then, one morning in October, the postman brought a parcel. The paper was foreign. She untied the string and unfolded a note written in German, but beneath it, in smaller handwriting, was an English translation. Neat, formal, deliberate. The kind of handwriting that came from someone who measured every word. Dear Maggie, she passed peacefully, holding your letter. I told her about Texas, about the nurse who treated even her enemies with gentleness. She said you must have been sent by God to remind us that kindness doesn't wear a uniform. I am writing from Bremen, but I will not stay long. The city is rebuilding, and yet I feel like a man carrying bricks for someone else's house. I believe my home is still where the sun smells like cedar. If you'll have me, I'd like to come back. Not as a patient, not as a foreigner, but as a neighbor. Ernst. She read it twice, then folded it against her chest. Outside, the Texas sky stretched wide and clean, as if waiting for an answer. He arrived 2 weeks later. The morning train hissed to a stop in Abilene, its wheels releasing a long sigh. Passengers stepped down. Soldiers in plainclothes, traveling salesmen, women with toddlers in arms. And then him, older by a season, tanned, his hair trimmed short, his eyes still carrying the soft exhaustion of someone who has seen too much and decided to live anyway. He held a small suitcase. and in his other hand, a single white flower wrapped in newspaper. Maggie was waiting on the platform. She didn't wave. She just smiled the way you smile when life hands back something you thought was gone. He tipped his hat. "You got my letter?" "I did," she said. "And I baked a pie just in case you were serious." He laughed. "Then I must stay. It would be rude not to." That afternoon they drove out to the old campsite one last time. The fields had gone gold with autumn, the grass rippling like memory. Only the stone foundation of the ward remained. "I thought they'd level this too," he said. "They tried," Maggie replied. "But I told them I needed the stone for the new wing of the clinic. I wanted it to remember where it came from." He knelt, running his hand along the rough edge of the stone. "Feels the same." "So do you," she said quietly. He looked up, caught her eyes, and for a moment neither spoke. There was too much between them for words to hold. They walked toward the edge of the property, where two small markers still stood, the graves of the unnamed POWs. Someone, maybe her, had left fresh wildflowers. "I always wondered their names," he said softly. "They knew them," she replied. "That's enough." He nodded, eyes wet but steady. "You taught me that peace isn't forgetting, it's remembering kindly." "And you taught me," she said, "that healing doesn't always come from doctors." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. The sky began to turn silver at the edges. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. The brass key to Ward C. "I kept it," he said. "Didn't feel right giving it to anyone else." She took it, brushed her thumb over the worn metal, then closed his fingers back around it. "Keep it. Maybe one day we'll build a new door for it." That evening, they sat on the porch of her small house on Chestnut Street, watching the last light fall over the plains. "Do you think people will understand?" he asked. "That a German soldier came back to Texas to thank an American nurse? That we both needed saving," he said. She smiled, eyes reflecting the porch light. "Maybe they don't have to understand. Maybe it's enough that we did." A breeze rattled the screen door. Somewhere down the street a radio played Sentimental Journey. He reached for his pocket notebook, the same one he had once used to learn English in captivity. On the first page, beneath the old word friend, he wrote a new one. Home. Zoo house. He handed her the pencil. "Your turn." She looked at the word, then added another line beneath it, her handwriting looping and careful. Mercy. Nade. They both smiled at the page, a dictionary that now belonged to neither language alone. Days turned into weeks. He found work at the clinic repairing instruments and translating manuals. She pretended not to notice how often his name appeared in the appointment ledger for volunteer assistance. The townspeople, at first cautious, grew used to seeing him at the market, walking with Maggie through rows of peaches and okra. The children called him Mr. Ernst. Once, a veteran from the Legion Hall stopped him outside the church. "You staying for good?" he asked. Ernst nodded. The man studied him, then stuck out his hand. "Then welcome home." That night Maggie found him sitting on the porch again, looking at the sky like it was a language he was finally learning to read. "Everything all right?" she asked. He nodded. "Just listening." "To what?" "The sound of a country forgiving itself," he said. Weeks later, as the first chill of winter returned, the clinic held its reopening ceremony for the new wing. The sign above the door read, Alden Keller Wing, built on the foundations of peace. Reporters came, took photographs, asked questions. When one of them asked, "Dr. Alden, why name it after a former enemy?" she only said, "Because the war didn't end with victory. It ended with compassion." Ernst stood beside her, holding the ribbon steady while she cut it. The flashbulbs went off like tiny lightning. Someone in the crowd began to clap, and soon everyone did. Later, when the people had gone, the lights off, and only the smell of disinfectant and sawdust filled the air, she turned to him. "Do you ever wonder why we got lucky?" He looked around the empty hall. "Because we refused to stay enemies." She nodded. "That's the lesson I'll keep teaching." They locked up the building together. He slipped the brass key into the new door's lock. It fit perfectly. "See?" she whispered. "Told you it would open another door someday." He smiled, eyes soft. "Then let's keep walking through them." Outside, night spread over Texas like a calm sea. The last train passed in the distance, its whistle long and low. He reached for her hand, tentative, almost shy, and she didn't pull away. Somewhere out there, the world was still patching itself back together. But on this small piece of earth, under the same sky that once divided them, a German soldier and an American nurse had found what the world had promised and rarely delivered. Not victory, Not even forgiveness. Something quieter. Peace.